Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy, and I am the Museum Services Manager for the Sandusky Library and Follett House Museum. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Sandusky and the Underground Railroad. Now, I know your teachers have talked to you already about what the Underground Railroad is, but just to kind of go over it again, the Underground Railroad is the name or nickname that was given to the network of trails and people who helped enslaved people reach their freedom. And of course, the Underground Railroad ran through Ohio, it ran through all the southern states, ran up into like Pennsylvania, New York, and that way up into Canada. And actually, there was even an Underground Railroad that ran down into Mexico because Mexico also did not have slavery at this point in time. So the Underground Railroad ran everywhere. And Sandusky not only was an important part of the Underground Railroad, it was well known as a location on the Underground Railroad. There's a famous book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was written in the 1830s, if I remember correctly, that was written that talked, it was a fictional story, so it didn't actually happen, but it was talked about people who were enslaved, and some of them were able to gain their freedom, and they came, actually the two of the characters that talk about gaining their freedom came through Sandusky. So it was nationally known as a place where people could go to get their freedom, or to one of the places on the way to freedom. We'll talk a little bit about the people who helped do this, but first let's talk about why is Sandusky important. Well, as you guys know, Sandusky is located on Lake Erie. So because of that, we had lots of boats and ferries going to Detroit, going to Buffalo, New York, some going to Canada. And the people who are escaping slavery, called freedom seekers, they could take boats and go to Detroit, and Detroit is right next to the Canadian border, and they could get into Canada there. Because once they're in Canada, they were free, they were safe. None of the slave catchers could get them in Canada. They could take a ferry or a boat over to Buffalo, New York, once again, be able to get into Canada really easily there. There were boats, and there are stories of people taking freedom seekers across the lake into Canada directly from Sandusky to here. And that was one of the big reasons Sandusky was important in the Underground Railroad. The other reason was Sandusky in the 1800s was a big railroad hub. So we actually had lots of railroads. If you know where the fountain is downtown, that was where one of the big train stations were. And trains were important because they move quickly, and these people who are trying to gain their freedom or keep their freedom were able to get on the trains and go to, once again, like Detroit or Buffalo, New York, somewhere where they could get into Canada or get further up north where they were less likely to be caught and, of course, taken back into slavery. So Sandusky, just because of where it was located and all the trains and the boats and everything, was really important in the Underground Railroad. Now, of course, as your teachers probably have told you, the things that that people were doing to help enslaved people get to freedom was illegal. There was a law passed called the Fugitive Slave Act, which compelled everyone in the country to assist or at least not hinder or stop people who were trying to catch these slaves and take them back down into slavery. And if you were convicted of that, you would be fined, which some of the people we're going to talk about actually had that happen to them. Like I said, we'll talk to them when we get down to that part. So it's amazing that these people were willing to risk getting arrested and fines and things like that to help these people. But that does create one thing that makes learning about the Underground Railroad really hard. And that is, we don't really know a lot about it. We know what it is. We know some of the people who used it, and we know some of the people who helped enslaved people. Like I said, we'll talk about a few. But most of them, their names never got written down. They never told their stories. This is for a variety of reasons. The biggest one, though, is what they were doing was illegal. So when they were actively doing the Underground Railroad, they didn't want to be known that they're helping these people because they could get arrested and fined and all sorts of bad things could happen to them. So not many people wanted to be known that they were openly helping enslaved people reach freedom. The other reason is the Underground Railroad ends basically when the Civil War starts. And the Civil War, of course, is big, and you guys will learn about it later. But once the Civil War begins, the Underground Railroad in the northern states basically dies off. Everyone's worried about the war, and slaves who are reaching the northern states don't have to worry about being sent back down to their masters. They are, because of the war, they're not being sent back down. So that makes the learning about the Underground Railroad a little tricky. But we do have examples of several different people who lived here in town. We have pictures of two of them. And I want to talk just about a few of the Sandusky residents who were important in the Underground Railroad. And I have two examples of people who were, well, three examples of people who were always committed to the cause. And I actually have an example of a person who changed their mind, which I think is fascinating that we have their own words to kind of talk about it. So probably the best known person who was a part of the Underground Railroad here in Sandusky was a gentleman by the name of Rush Sloane. And here's a picture of him. Now, Rush Sloane was a mayor of Sandusky for a while and was a big part, was a lawyer, served as a judge. He did all sorts of things. But we do know he was a part of the Underground Railroad. We know that he hid people in his house. The big case, or the thing that Sloane's best known for, is in 1854, Rush Sloane freed two freedom seekers from the custody of slave catchers, people who were going back to try and bring these people back into slavery. And that was, of course, illegal. It was against the Fugitive Slave Act. So Rush Sloane was actually taken to court by the owner of these two slaves, and who claimed them as their property. It took 3 different court cases, but eventually Rush Sloane was convicted, and he was sentenced to pay $4,330, which was the cost of what this person said these slaves were worth. And the town felt so bad that he had to do this. They actually raised about $400 to help Rush Sloane pay off the rest of the fine. And then, of course, he had to pay it himself. And that's, $4,000 today is a lot of money. Back in the 1800s and the 1850s, that was a lot of money. Think $100,000 today. It was a lot of money. So it was a big penalty, but this didn't stop him from doing this. He continued to be a part of the Underground Railroad. And with Rush Sloane, the 2 men that he freed were so grateful that they actually gave him this cane. It's a walking stick, but it has silver on this end, and it has a brass tip on this end. And this was given to him by the 2 freedom seekers that he helped get to Canada. The next person from Sandusky I want to talk about is Lucas Beecher. Lucas Beecher was once again a lawyer. He moved to Sandusky very early in life, and he was always a abolitionist, or someone who believed that there should be no slavery anywhere in the country or in the world. And he was always a big person who wanted to help people who were trying to escape slavery. We know that he did help several people. I have a picture of him here while I'm still thinking about it. And Beecher, once again, fought court cases to help African Americans get free who were enslaved. One of which, a big court case, was Beecher defended a man who was still claimed to be a slave by who was his master, but he argued because he was in Ohio and he was sold in Ohio, and in Ohio slavery was illegal, that he was technically free. And he won that court case, and that man, Johnson was his name, got to stay free. And he fought all the time to help keep people help people on their way with their freedom. He also had a saying or explanation as to why he decided to be an abolitionist and to continue doing so. It's because of his religion, and he believed that slavery was bad, that it was immoral, that it went against what God believed. He actually said he placed God's law over man's law, and that was his idea, that it was his duty as a servant of God, to help these people, even though it went against what the law was in the country. We had another person. Unfortunately, don't have a picture of his picture. Is Francis Drake Parish. Now, Francis Drake Parish, once again, is a lawyer, but originally he was not an abolitionist. He believed in slavery, not so much that he wanted it brought back in Ohio, but he believed it was a right. He also was racist, unfortunately, and didn't believe free African Americans could live in the United States with everyone else. But he did change his mind. We're not sure exactly what changed his mind, but in the 1830s, he completely changed, became an abolitionist, did not believe that we could live in an integrated society. And it's really fascinating to me that, once again, this was a man who was able to change his mind and see the wrongs of slavery and want to help people. He was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, or someone who ran a safe house on the Underground Railroad. He doesn't know how many people he helped. By his estimation, he says hundreds. And once again, he was arrested for violating or breaking the law, the Fugitive Slave Act, and was fined $500. And he didn't pay any of it. His friends paid it because they believed in his work. Sandusky, for the most part, didn't have a lot of people who sided with slavery or the slave catchers. There were some, but not many. Most people were either wanted to totally get rid of slavery or didn't want to help bring people back into slavery. Parish, by his own admission, says he was threatened all the time, but he was never attacked and no one ever threatened his property. And he believed he was doing the right thing. The last person I really want to talk about, his name is Reverend Thomas Boston Holland. The Reverend Thomas Boston Holland was a prominent African-American minister here in Sandusky. We know that he came to Sandusky originally in around 1873, and he was because he was African-American and a minister, he not only helped people himself, but he was able to help people who were escaping slavery and direct them to other people's houses. And he was one of the big parts of the Underground Railroad here in Sandusky. And I have a little quote that was written in 1888 about the Reverend Thomas Boston Holland. Mr. Boston has always been a devoted friend of the slave, and his kindly services were always at their disposal. His house was constantly open to them, and when he had no more room, he was certain to find for them a friend in need where they could be taken care of. Ever since his first coming to Ohio, he has been known as a reliable friend of the fugitive, and a history of his many undertakings in their behalf would prove the most entertaining were all the facts at hand. Now, from that quote from 1888, which was right after he died, unfortunately, we know that he was, of course, a big part of the Underground Railroad, and unfortunately, we don't have the facts at hand to know what he did. We wish that we had that information, but we do, like I said, we know he came to Sandusky in the around, I think I said 1870s earlier, I apologize, 1840s, and was a big part of the Underground Railroad movement here. And I'm sure there are lots and lots of other people who were in Sandusky, who were a part of the Underground Railroad and helped, that we'll never know their stories because they weren't written down, either because they were afraid because what they were doing was illegal, or because they didn't think it was important once the Civil War came along, or a big part of it was we don't have a lot of accounts from people who weren't rich or well educated during that time period. So a lot of these people who would have played a role in the Underground Railroad will never have a good account of what they did. And it is a real shame. But Sandusky, going back, was a big part of the Underground Railroad, and we are very lucky that we live in a town that has such a wonderful history and connection to the Underground Railroad. And we can be proud of what the town did to help partially end slavery or help people who were escaping from slavery and helping them. And Sandusky did do his part to help end slavery because we sent many soldiers to the Civil War, which of course helped to end slavery all in the United States. So I thank you guys for listening to me, and hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions for me, if you tell your teacher, she'll email them to me, and I will email her back and get you your answers. Or your teachers probably will be able to answer them as well, either way. But thank you for joining me. Have a great day, and thank you for joining us for a video from the Follett House.